back to Liquid Lunch. That's the girl. That's just girl. They're called girl.
Girl.
Not the girls. Not girls.
Not girly.
They're just girl from Montreal. So we're here with Tibor Shanto. I always call you a sales guru,
Right.
Yes.
Tibor.
I thought we worked that out
growing on
last
you
time.
yet?
Did we?
We sort of went to initially the Warlock of,
Oh,
based on Charlie Sheen, and it was the sales torpedo of truth or
I
something.
don't think I was here.
No. Okay.
It's still resisting guru.
All right.
Okay.
Okay. Well,
Rabbi?
I don't know. I'm
sales rabbi?
Sure. Because I'm resisting Warlock.
I wasn't here for Warlock. I don't know.
All right. So now, Tibor, you put out a blog that's very popular with people who are in the sales.
So they tell me we have, I think, close to 1,000 subscribers on a daily basis, and it's updated minimum 3 times a week, most of the time a bit more. But I'm committed to Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays.
That's a big commitment.
Well, yeah, I think it's, these days it's one way to make sure that you're following. It does
Right.
have something that's fresh in you and so on, and it's also an opportunity for me to create content, and much like the fellow that was here before, it's a way to capture things that you can repurpose and reuse in different ways,
Right.
including books and things. So.
And
Well, one of the things I've noticed, Tibor, at the end of your blog, you've got, you've always say the same thing. What's in your sales pipeline?
Yeah, I always end it with what's in your pipeline.
Yeah.
Because I think that is the relevant question in sales, and sadly, it's one of the ones that when you ask sales professionals, they often have difficulty answering it in a meaningful way. So the reason I keep bringing it up is I think ultimately if you can answer that question with a degree of confidence, then you should be able to have some success and show some revenue as a result. And ultimately I brought it down that there's probably 4 things that make up a good pipeline, beginning with attitude. The other is how you use time, and we've talked about time allocation versus time management and so on. Ultimately the process that you have, and then finally execution, because I think a lot of people have great plans, they just don't execute.
right.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if you have those 4 things in place, then you should be able to answer with a great degree of confidence what is in your pipeline. But unfortunately, a lot of people, when I ask them what's in their pipeline, they either don't know or it's too cluttered to figure out.
Yeah. Okay. So should we talk about those 4 things one at
Sure.
a time?
Yeah.
Okay. So the first one is
Attitude.
attitude.
Yeah.
So I've got attitude in my pipeline.
Well, there's, we're talking about what's in your pipeline. Part of it is how you get things there. But yeah, you can have attitude in your pipeline. I think sometimes I look at my pipeline and it reflects an attitude.
Okay.
I think certainly companies you go after. I talk to a lot of salespeople and you ask them why they're not engaging with certain companies and so on, and they tell me there's various reasons that they can't, and I think that comes down to their attitude, their outlook, and so on. I think attitude is one of those things that you can work on, but does make the difference in your ability to actually realize where you want to go, again, going back to the last guest, versus being stuck in a place. And sometimes the main difference is, and I'll give you a specific example. When I do workshops with different groups, there's always the reality of role play. You have to try out what it is that you're going to do in the real world. And if you think about it, in that room is probably the safest place to try and fail.
Right.
Yet a lot of people tell me that they're uncomfortable and they don't want to look foolish, yet they have no problem looking foolish in front of a prospect for not having practiced what it is that they're supposed to do. So I think the attitude that they bring to their game definitely reflects in the prospects that they have in their pipeline and who it is that they're going to be selling to. So not so much if you have attitude in your pipeline, but certainly there's a sprinkling of it,
Well, it's. I mean, I think the point is
Yeah.
is well taken. That it's really important the attitude that salespeople have, and that's part of what fills up their pipeline. So, is there like one common attitude that all salespeople can adopt, no matter what industry they're in, or?
I wouldn't say there's one. I mean, certainly I would say persistence, being tenacious, I think being creative, and I think, again, sometimes it's just the way you decide to approach things, who it is that you're going to approach, the attitude that you project when you're approaching a senior person especially. And I think sometimes it's that attitude or lack of attitude that when they're approaching a senior person or they're approaching a decision maker who is in fact maybe in the mode of making a selection, it's their attitude that defeats them.
What do they need in their, like, what does their attitude need to reflect to be able to successfully get through to that senior
The
person?
attitude has to reflect a certain level of their plan. Their attitude has to reflect a certain willingness to win. a certain willingness to do what it is that it takes to win. Sometimes I'm asked, why did I win a particular deal? And I wanted it a bit more than the next person. So I was willing to go a little bit further. I was willing to reach a little bit further out. So I think it's having a plan and not allowing yourself to be deterred from that plan, but at the same time making sure that your plan is up to date and reflects the reality of the sale that you're in. The other attitude is to really value your time and value your ability a lot more than salespeople do. So while tenacious is one thing, on the other hand, at the same time, you have to also be willing to let go of certain things, because this attitude of winning at all costs is not what I'm talking about. The attitude is, what can I win realistically and maximize my opportunities?
Okay, great. So that's number one, attitude. Number two.
Number two is time. We talked a lot about time allocation versus time management. A lot of times salespeople who have good attitude sometimes fail strictly because they run out of time. There is that 24-hour paradigm that we're all living in.
Yeah.
So it's the ability to really step back, analyze what it takes, and we talked about it at length, I think a few times back. Understand what it takes for you to win, what are the key activities that you have to execute day in, day out, prioritize those, figure out how much of that has to be in the mix over a given sales cycle, and then make sure that you're actually allocating that time, and then at the same time managing the activities that you have to do. So if you've set aside time to research a particular client and somebody calls and makes you an offer to go somewhere or do something different, you need to have the discipline, which I guess is partly attitude as well, to say, no, this time has been allocated to this task, I will finish this task and then move on to the next, as opposed to trying to be all things to all people, trying to do everything all at once. And we talked about the downside of multitasking, I think, in the past. So it's really taking ownership, control, and accountability for your time, but not accountability in terms of being accountable to the boss, but accountability of being accountable to your own success.
Accountable to your objectives.
Yeah.
Figure out what your objectives are and then prioritize your time.
Yeah.
Do the right things.
Do the right things in the right proportions.
Yeah.
It's not a go with the flow kind of thing. You have to
Yeah.
commit to what you're doing.
You have to plan a few next steps ahead.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so that's two. Number three.
Number three is process, methodology, whatever you want to call it, but you have to have a step-by-step plan. I think, again, you need to know where you want to go. Generally, you have a sense of what it is that you're selling, who you're selling it to, what it takes to get there. So whether it's a 3-month sale, 5-month sale, how many meetings, what has to follow, what things have to be in place, what are some of the foundations that you have to build. You have to have, it sounds somewhat boring because sales is supposed to be exotic and loose, but you need to have a framework, and that framework has to be based in logic and has to have sequential steps, and you need to review whether it's still worth pursuing this or not. And that's, again, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, some people have difficulty letting go. So all the objective measures suggest that this sale is not going to happen, yet emotionally they want that sale, so they'll deviate from their rules, they'll deviate from their workflow, and they'll end up wasting time, which impacts their whole time allocation. So I think having a step-by-step process, we touched on this before, that salespeople are worried about being rejected when they're making cold calls, or they're worried about objections at the end of a sale. I think if you have a pre-plan and a methodology for dealing with that, then you're much better able to manage it, and you're much better able to deal with the outcome, and you will eventually get more sales because you'll have more times doing the right things.
Okay, great. So the process, of course, is very important. And then number 4?
Execute.
Oh, yeah.
Just do it.
There is that, I mean, I wish in some ways Nike hadn't branded
Yeah,
that, but
seriously.
I think they hit their head. They think they hit the mark right on the head. And I think there's a great commercial, and if people want it, I can send them the URL because it's on YouTube. But I don't know if you remember, but UPS used to do these great ads back in the early part of the last decade where they talked about different roles in the company and how they would benefit from UPS. And they had one where 2 consultants were telling an executive what they think he should do vis-a-vis this and vis-a-vis that. And there's this moment's rest, and he says, great, let's do it. And they go, no, we don't do anything, we just recommend things. So the problem with the first 3 things, I can have a great attitude, and I can really allocate my time, and I can have a great plan, a really meticulous plan. But at one point, you got to leave the building and you got to take it to the street. And I think a lot of times salespeople, as I would argue a lot of other professions, just fail to execute, or they execute in a very inadequate way. They go through the motions as opposed to applying the attitude that's supposed to be there to begin with in order to succeed. And I would say of the people that I train, most often their biggest failure is not in the first 3, but they just didn't do it.
Right.
What do you tell somebody who's, great at the first three, but just not doing it? I mean, because, first thought is you tell them, just do it, right? But it's sometimes easier said than done to actually get somebody to take that action.
Yeah, and I think what you have to do is break it down. And one of the advantages of having a process is you can make the discussion very much about the process instead of you as my boss telling me, why aren't you doing this, or you're doing this bad, or if you only did this, which becomes very personal, and we all get defensive no matter how thick of a skin we might have. One of the advantages of having a methodology and a process is that you can actually have a discussion about why the process is not sticking or where the difficulty is, and then break it down into pieces that the individual could see as being winnable, as opposed to being so big that that's what stunts them to begin with, is they can't do it because it's all so big. So I think, to your point, the discussion that I would have, or the discussion that I have, is around what do we need to do together to execute the process, and that allows us to break it down piece by piece. And then once you have that, you can take each little piece and put a little action plan around it. People tend to take it on a bit more because you're not trying to change everything all at once, but you're dealing with it incrementally. If they have success on the first piece, they're much more likely to take on the second piece. So I think you have that discussion. But I also want to caution that at one point the discussion is not about execution or methodology. It's just an HR issue, and they may not be suited to the job either.
Right.
That's what I was going to say. It's not for everybody. If you're not executing, maybe this isn't where you need, where you should be.
I think one of the sad parts about sales is that a lot of people that I talk to somehow landed in sales. They didn't intend out being in sales. They tried this, they tried that, they tried the other thing, and the only thing that was left was a sales job. So as a result of that, they end up in sales, and it's not really meant for them. And they probably be much better suited to hospitality or something like that, but they have this job, so they stick with it. So I think, again, what a lot of organizations are reluctant to do is to weed out the truly poor performers. So again, I'm not suggesting if somebody's having a bad quarter, you don't work with them and try and bring them up to their capabilities. But once you've tried everything, you've worked with them, you've broken it down for them, and it's still not coming together, and they seem to lack the attitude and so on, then it's an entirely different issue.
Right.
It's not a magic formula. It works if all the ingredients are in place. If they're not,
All right, so what else do we need to know today? Or
Today?
What else do you want to let people know about today about what's in your pipeline?
But what's in your pipeline? Ultimately, the fact that it is the core of the whole sales success. I think sometimes people tend to overlook their pipeline and they look at various aspects of it. But if you think about it in sports, they talk about how if you have the good core, it'll help you no matter which sport you're in. Well, similarly with your pipeline, I think most people tend to not look at their pipeline strategically. They tend to just look at it as something that they have to report to their boss, or something that holds a whole bunch of prospects or what have you. So the thing that I would tell them to do is really ask themselves that question every day: what is in my pipeline? What would I like to be there at the end of the day? And then take steps towards that. And to do that, they can read my blog, which takes us right back to the beginning.
Get
Fantastic.
your blog information so that
Yeah.
people can check it out.
Really easy, www.sellbetter, SELLBETTER.ca/blog.
Great.
And if they want to just stop at sellbetter.ca, they can see everything
The
else
whole
that you do,
enchilada.
right? Yeah.
And they can get, everything.
All right. Well, I'm still standing by Sales Guru.
Yeah,
If you like.
that's where my vote goes to. I don't know.
I don't know about this
I won't turn it
warlock thing.
down. Yeah, that was, I forget the gentleman who was here that time, but because it was hot on the heels of Charlie Sheen and his
yeah.
adventures on the road. I
Right.
think that's where it came from.
All right. Well, people don't have to go to they don't have to go out of their house to see your show, Tibor, because people,
right.
as you said, can go to sellbetter.ca
And I've yet to
/blog.
be booed off the stage.
Well, let's hope that continues.
I hope so too.
All right. Tibor, thanks again
Thank
for
you.
coming in today.
Always
My
good to have
pleasure.
you.
And we're going to take a little break, come back with Clark Lord right
Yes.
after this.